This video is kind of something that's been sitting in my mind for a while, and I think that it sets up for a very interesting discussion, with the primary question being, are backpacks too good? There are a lot of factors that go into the question, but to quickly summarize it, just to give the rundown, backpacks are items that are crafted at a science machine, and they require some grass and twigs, 4 of each to be exact. This is almost essential in any given playthrough, since the backpack just gives you 8 additional inventory slots at the cost of what is essentially nothing. Almost every player has these on 24/7, and you should too if you don't already, because 8 extra inventory slots is so powerful. Now here's where the discussion gets interesting. The fact that this costs little to nothing for your character to have, and the fact that it gives you so much, means that people forego most everything else. And that is why I've been thinking about whether or not backpacks are too good. The body slot is essentially just dictated by backpacks, and I don't know whether or not that is a good thing. It's such a detriment to miss out on those 8 slots that it's a genuine concern of mine that it's unhealthy that people don't even consider other body slot clothing as an option. Players miss out on things like raincoats or insulation vests, summer frocks, and the list goes on. Wearing Magiluminescence is such a commitment that some players, myself included, choose not to because of the idea that I'd rather make smaller trips and gather more resources when I'm going out and about, rather than saving myself the hassle of getting to that point in time. There's also the issue of insulation being... Whenever I go out and do something in winter or summer or spring, I always just have a backpack equipped because, rather than wearing insulation for winter or summer to make my outings last longer, I'd rather just have the materials for campfires or endothermic fires, or endothermic fire pits and things of that nature. And even in spring, when compared to a raincoat, having a backpack is actually just more beneficial. Because rather than wearing a raincoat, which effectively loses you 8 inventory slots because you don't have the backpack, you can just have a football helmet and an umbrella, which take up 2 slots. Or you could just have an eyebrow, which just takes up 1. Granted, in regards to the eyebrow, that is more so of an issue that it's something that you can equip on your head is already better than something that you could equip on your body and is already easily available. And in so many instances, it's just better to have extra inventory, and to have that extra bit of inventory filled with things that can make your experience easier or better. Backpacks just greatly overshadow most every body slot in the game, with some exceptions, and even then, they're only overshadowed because of how easy it is to unequip then re-equip them. Body armor, for example. This is something that I typically use because I think it's good with backpacks. Once you're more experienced in the game, it's easy to tell when you are or aren't going to be in combat. And it's easier to handle those situations in which you could start equipping body armor, and then unequipping your backpack temporarily, then re-equipping it once you're actually done with the fighting. The raincoat also falls into a similar vein, in which, if you get too wet, you could just wear the raincoat for a bit to bring the wetness down, and then once you dry off, you can simply re-equip the backpack. This also just saves you extra inventory slots because you would just have 1 thing in your inventory, meaning that you would get a net gain of 7 inventory slots, with mostly all the benefits of wearing a raincoat. This idea is a lot harder to implement when it comes to wearing insulation in your body slot, because for those you have to have insulation at most all times in order for you to feel that impact, which therefore makes seasonal clothing much less of a viable option. You're essentially measuring whether or not having additional insulation is worth -8 inventory slots, because a backpack is so essential to you, which is really hard to argue in favor for insulation in that regard. So this brings up the idea. Are body slot items too weak in comparison to backpacks, or are backpacks too strong for their own good to the point where they should be nerfed? I'll say it right now. Backpacks? Probably too strong. Should they be nerfed? Hell no. Backpacks are incredibly strong resources, and nerfing them would make the game a lot less enjoyable because it would just add more tedium to the game. Not being able to carry as many resources to massive projects is simply too annoying for mega basers, and not being able to carry as many resources back from things like boss killing or boss rushing, or just rushing the ruins, things of that nature, is going to make the experience a lot less enjoyable for the average player who does partake in those things. So what alternatives are there to make seasonal clothing / constantly wearing things other than backpacks more of a good option? There's always the option of just modding it out, and this is no exception. A popular mod that, in my opinion, feels a little too good is extra equip slots. The benefits is, it does allow you to explore more varieties of clothing and armor. Because typically, if you're one of the players who just focuses on their headgear for most of their issues when it comes to rain or when it comes to keeping cool, or even if it's something like armor where you just wear a football helmet or a Wigford helmet, having extra equip slots makes those cost significantly less because you aren't giving up the 8 extra inventory slots. Now, the downsides, I'll say it, it's a little too good. In my experience, whenever people have this mod on, it is very easy to abuse because you essentially pick a character like Wanda or Maxwell, and you just have knight armor on at basically all times, which ends up meaning that you have 95% less damage absorption. So you're just going to be essentially invincible on these characters that are supposed to be glass cannons. There's a similar impact with Wolfgang, in which if he wears marble armor, then he could just walk around being an extra tanky character. Overall, I think considering it at the very least is an interesting thing, because while it is overpowered in some regards, having that as an additional option without having to give up a backpack might actually be a good thing for the game. Albeit it would be very much a really, really strong option, but having like maybe just having a beta in which for a while you run this idea of having extra equip slots base game, and then seeing what the community feels after an extended period of time, and then seeing what they think about it, might be pretty healthy. I think a good healthy tweak that they could also implement, maybe just to test out here and there, might be to make it so that things like a backpack and clothing armor, so that being clothing that like deteriorates over time, if they do implement extra equip slots into base game in this beta, I think it would be really interesting to test whether or not it would be a good idea to make armor, so that being things that reduce damage and don't cost durability to use, just in passive day-to-day, you could make those category of armor or body slots take up both of the slots, so that way people aren't just running around with knight armor or a marble suit with no downside, while also still having those extra inventory slots. And then the backpack and clothing items, so that being things like the hibernation vest and things of that nature, would end up costing 1 slot, which, in my opinion, would allow people to just walk around with clothing items day to day, as well as still getting the benefits of the backpack. I think that would be a really cool thing to test. You know, just give it a little test run, see what the community thinks after they've been exposed to it for a while, and then, like, make tweaks accordingly. Maybe this would only work for things that are considered seasonal items, so maybe it doesn't work with armor, so you're not just a walking damage sponge most of the time. Maybe it only works for something like the insulated vest or the breezy vest, things of that nature. I think that would give these items a bit more room to shine, and would highlight how good they are to the average player who doesn't really use them. Then there's the, well, what about uncompromising mode? So uncompromising mode, for those of you who are unfamiliar, is a fan-made mod, and this implements a lot of things, but one of the biggest things that it implements is the changes to clothing, in which it gives clothing quote-unquote pockets. So think about it as, if you equip, let's say, a breezy vest, for example, the breezy vest will have like N amount of pocket space. I don't remember the exact number, but let's say for the sake of this example, it has 6 slots in total, which is 2 less than a backpack, so you are still losing it. But you also get the benefits of having that piece of clothing on. So you get the insulation for the season at the cost of slightly less inventory slots. Because while 2 is a downgrade, it isn't as big of a downgrade as having the benefits of that item, as well as minus what is essentially 8 from not having the backpack. This kind of feels like brushing the problem under the rug, though, in some ways, where it doesn't address the core issues of missing out on inventory space being a huge factor. But it definitely remedies it in some ways, so I have a hard time saying that this is a bad option. You know, it's just not an option that I think I would be in favor of personally. Overall, this is a very weird and complicated dichotomy between a backpack being too good and it being just good enough. If it's nerfed, then most everybody would hate it, because everybody is so accustomed to a backpack having 8 slots, and then relying on that for most of the game. Removing that in some degree would just kind of feel wrong. But, you know, maybe it's necessary, I don't know. If you add the mod extra equip slots to base game, then it also introduces a bit of an imbalance in having all those inventory slots paired with things like armor protection or even just the insulation from the seasons. The biggest thing is that there's a give and take in having a backpack, but I would say having it gives too much because not having it essentially is taking 8 inventory slots. And maybe that is an issue with clothing items in your body slot not being good enough to warrant using them. However, I don't really think that's the case because in a lot of scenarios, backpacks are just better. Like, just having extra inventory is so much stronger in comparison to most anything else you could get in the game, with some exceptions, and even then, it's in very niche scenarios. I don't know. From what I could tell, the benefit to loss ratio of having it versus not having it is simply too big, and something that somebody else should probably think of needs to be done about it. Let me know what you guys think. Is this an issue? Is it fair and balanced? Do you guys have any ideas that you want to put forward? Let me know, because this is something that's actually been in my head for a while, and I think it's a really interesting discussion to have, because inventory and Don't Starve is such a core mechanic, because managing your inventory is such a huge factor in this game, because you need a lot of stuff at most any given point in time. Having more inventory room is just more instances where you could be prepared for any and all eventualities. So yeah, it's just interesting to me. So let me know what you guys think, but until next time, bye-bye.